In this video, we're going to be looking at a huge collection of mysteries, disappearances, strange occurrences, and real-life horror stories. That will include some of the most puzzling and odd cases in history. We have spent many days scouring the internet for some of the strangest stories we could find. So, from using ground-up corpses for medicine to a murder victim sending messages from the grave, join us as we delve into some of the most bizarre true stories out there. Hit those lights, sit back, and prepare to be disturbed. Sometimes things happen that are just beyond our comprehension and leave us scratching our heads and looking for answers. If that's ever happened to you, you might want to take advantage of today's video sponsor, Purple Garden, and the service they offer. Purple Garden connects you to psychic, tarot, and astrology advisors who can help you clarify and answer some of life's most challenging questions. These advisors have personalized bios where they talk about their experience, with some even offering palm readings, dream analysis, and more. You can choose whichever advisor best fits you, and then connect with them via text chat, audio, or video call. Purple Garden advisors are never going to beat around the bush, and will help you find the clarity that you need at those times when you don't know what is best to do. Get your own reading by going to purplegarden.com/top5 or using the link in the description. For new Purple Garden customers, you can get your first deposit of $10 matched by using our code TOP5 to get even more out of it. Thank you for supporting the channel, and we hope you enjoy Purple Garden. And now, if you haven't already done so, hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy. We're going to start with an insane story from Pearl Harbor that I myself found hard to believe, but it's real. It's a story about a battleship that was salvaged after Pearl Harbor that indicated 3 sailors survived in an airtight room for 16 days before dying. On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service launched a surprise aerial attack on the US naval base of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Within 2 hours, 21 US warships had been sunk or damaged, 188 aircraft destroyed, and 2,403 American servicemen and women killed. The attack precipitated the entry of the United States into World War II. The day after the attack, frantic rescuers sifted through the wreckage, trying to rescue as many people as possible. As expected, they heard all sorts of noises. One in particular they thought was a piece of loose rigging slapping against the wrecked hulls. However, the next day they realized the grim truth that someone was still alive, trapped deep in the forward hull of the sunken battleship USS West Virginia. The ship had taken at least 6 torpedoes and 2 bombs and burned for 30 hours before settling deep in the mud. Rescuing whoever was in there would be impossible, as cutting a hole would flood the whole thing, and just using a torch would risk an explosion. There was nothing anyone could do. No one wanted to do guard duty within earshot of the noise coming from the USS West Virginia. Eventually the banging stopped, making them realize the inevitable had happened. 6 months later, when salvage crews raised the West Virginia, they found the bodies of 3 sailors huddled in an airtight storeroom: Ronald Endicott, 18, Clifford Olds, 20, and Louis Buddy Costin, 21. However, the discovery of a calendar on which 16 days had been crossed off in red pencil was just as disturbing. The young soldiers had marked the days after December 7th, when their desperate tapping went unanswered as their lives slowly ebbed away, unaware of what had happened to their ship or that their country was at war. The calendar was sent to the Chief of Naval Personnel in Washington, D.C., and has since gone missing. Even their families don't know the truth. Ronald Endicott and Buddy Costin are buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific at Punch Bowl Crater in Honolulu. Cliff Old's body was returned to his hometown and buried in the city cemetery. All their headstones say they died on December 7th, 1941. The murder victim who named her killer after death. On February 21st, 1977, Teresa Tabassa, a respiratory therapist, was found dead in her Chicago apartment. The crime scene was gruesome, and Teresa's body was found under a burning mattress with a knife buried in her chest. The killer left few clues, and apart from trying to track down some stolen jewelry, the police had nothing to go on. The crime went unsolved for 6 months before they got an unexpected break. Surgeon Dr. Jose Chua, whose wife Remy was a respiratory therapist at the same hospital as Bassa, told police that she had been possessed on 3 separate occasions by the spirit of Bassa, and during these episodes she would speak in Bassa's native language, Tagalog, and claimed she named her killer as a man called Alan Showery. Despite being skeptical, detectives decided to check out the tip. Showery was known to both Chua and Bassa, as he worked at the same hospital. Apparently Showery had been in a difficult financial situation, and Bassa had been helping him out by paying him generously to do odd jobs for her. When police searched his apartment, they found Bassa's stolen jewellery, although he denied killing her. He was sent to trial, but later changed his plea to guilty, and was sentenced to 14 years for murder, robbery and arson, and ended up serving 6. So did a voice from beyond the grave really send a man to jail? Did Remy Chua unwittingly become a medium for the voice of a murdered woman? It's hard to say for sure, but does raise some interesting questions about the nature of the mind and the possession of a living person by the dead. What do you think? Nobody can understand what this Phaistos disc reads. The Phaistos disc is one of the most enigmatic archaeological finds ever. Its purpose, origins, even how it was made are up for debate, and decoding the symbols that cover it has proved impossible. The elaborate fired clay disc has a spiral of symbols stamped on both sides that have been interpreted as everything from a court list to a prayer, a poem, or even a curse. It was discovered in 1908 in Phaistos, a Bronze Age archaeological site 40 miles south of Heraklion, Crete, and is currently housed at the Heraklion Archaeological Museum. Its handmade roughness means its diameter ranges from 15.8 to 16.5 centimeters, and its thickness from 1.6 to 2.1 centimeters. There are 242 hieroglyph-like images in all, comprising 45 different symbols, as well as dashes and dots. It depicts people, plants and animals, with the most common glyphs including a bell, a walking man, and a cat head. The disc has been dated to around 1850 BC and 1550 BC, although this too is in dispute. Adding to the mystery is the unique methods used to create the disc. The symbols appear to have been stamped onto the clay, possibly using metal dyes, prior to it being baked at a very high temperature. This in itself makes the disc unusual, leading to it being called the oldest known form of movable type. It appears to be a one-off, as no other similar artifact has ever been found. Many theories about its meaning have been proposed over the years, with claims it's a list of religious centers, a healing ritual inscription, a poem, a hymn, a curse, a magical spell, musical notation, and a court list, to name a few. Some even believe it to be fake, but there is one overriding thought. No one really knows what it is, who made it, or what its inscriptions mean. Sarah Boone, Deadly Game of Hide and Seek. In February 2020, 42-year-old Sarah Boone called the police telling that her boyfriend, 42-year-old Jorge Torres, had died at her home in Winter Park north of Orlando. Take a listen to the 911 call and body cam footage.
My boyfriend and I were playing last night, and I put him in a case and we were playing, and like kind of hide and seek kind of thing. So I fell asleep, and I woke up, and he was dead in the suitcase. So I don't know what happened.
I fell asleep, forgetting that he was in the
suitcase. So you guys were
playing
the hide and go seek?
Yes.
And at some point you put him in the suitcase?
No, he got in the suitcase. So he thought it would be funny to be put in the suitcase. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to joke with you, and I'll zip you up and make him, squirm a little bit, whatever it is. But then I fell asleep. I fell asleep.
Where was the suitcase?
Right where it is.
In it? Right down there?
Yes.
You zipped him in there?
Yes.
Thought he would be funny, a little
joke.
It
was. We both were laughing about it. And then I fell asleep.
Where did you fall asleep at?
Upstairs.
In your bedroom?
Yes.
Okay.
Totally forgetting that he was in the suitcase still.
Okay.
When the police arrived, Sarah told them that the night before, herself and Jorge had been drinking and playing games, and they decided it would be funny if, while playing hide and seek, Jorge got into a case and she zipped him in. Sarah admitted leaving him in the zipped suitcase before going upstairs to bed and falling asleep. She claimed she assumed Torres could get out of the suitcase and would join her in bed later. However, the next morning she found Jorge still zipped in the bag but unresponsive. She claimed she attempted CPR, but he was already dead, so called her ex-husband, who arrived at the home, and urged her to call 911. Investigators soon realized Sarah's account didn't quite match up when they found a video on her phone that told a very different story. This video is extremely disturbing, so we'll only play a few seconds of it, but you can watch the full video on YouTube. It's Sarah videotaping Jorge inside the suitcase. Take a look.
Sarah, I can't breathe, babe. Seriously.
Yeah, that's when you do when you choke me.
Sarah was quickly arrested and interviewed. She was charged with second-degree murder, and in her interviews she claimed not to remember filming the videos, and after initially saying she never got drunk, she changed her story and blamed the incident on alcohol. It also emerged that she had previously been arrested in June 2018 on a battery charge of strangulation against Torres, and he was also charged with battery following an incident at the home. It seems they had a very volatile relationship. Sarah has not yet been convicted, and her trial is set for October 2023. Man becomes a musical genius after severe brain concussion. In 2006, 39-year-old Derek Amoto, who lived in Colorado, USA, was visiting his parents' hometown in South Dakota. During his stay, he visited a friend's house and was messing about with a football near the swimming pool. As the ball was thrown to him by his friend, he planned to catch the ball mid-air and glide across the pool water. But the stunt failed miserably, and Derek crashed headfirst onto the pool's concrete floor. He suffered such a severe concussion that blood came out of his ears, and he had a severe headache and suffered partial deafness. However, something extraordinary happened just 4 days after the incident. He was at the home of one of his high school friends in his makeshift music studio when he was drawn to an electronic keyboard. He had never played the piano before, but as he moved his fingers across the keys, he produced melodies so beautiful that it was as if he had received formal music training. Derek played for 6 long hours that day, producing some extraordinary tunes. It seemed the damage to his head had unlocked an unknown musical genius. He went on to play before live audiences and released a single and an album. Derek is not alone in discovering a hidden talent after suffering a severe brain injury in what is known as acquired savant syndrome. However, there is no clear explanation why this happens to some individuals and not others. For Derek, until the day he fell headfirst into a swimming pool, he had drifted through life with no clue what direction it was going in, but that fateful day changed his life forever for the good. Eben Byers. Sometimes the doctor gets it wrong. Eben Byers was born April 12, 1880. He was a Yale graduate with a reputation as an accomplished athlete and a bit of a ladies' man. In 1906, he won the United States Amateur Golf Championship and was chairman of his father's business, the Girard Iron Company. He seemingly had everything going for him. However, all that changed in 1927. Eben was traveling home by train from the annual Harvard-Yale football game when he fell from his berth and injured his arm. The pain persisted, and his doctor recommended a popular cure-all at the time called Radithor. Radithor was patented by William J. A. Bailey, who created it by dissolving high concentrations of radium-226 and 228 isotopes into distilled water. He claimed it was a cure for a wide range of ailments and marketed it as a cure for the living dead, and offered physicians 17% commission for every dose they prescribed. Eben followed his doctor's suggestion and tried Radithor and felt it not only helped with his pain, but was actually improving his overall health. So much so that he upped the dose and started ingesting large quantities of the mixture. He drank nearly 1,400 bottles of Radithor before he realized that it was killing him. It was slowly rotting his body from the inside out. By the time he found out the damage it was doing, it was too late, and cancer started eating away at his bones. Both his upper and lower jaw were being destroyed by a condition called radium jaw. He was operated on to remove the decaying tissue, but was left horribly disfigured, with a gaping hole where his mouth used to be. He had undergone 2 successful operations in which the whole upper and lower jaw, apart from 2 front teeth, had been removed. Eben's brain was also abscessed, and holes were forming in his skull. He died on March 31st, 1932, at the age of 51. The horrific circumstances of his death made headline news and highlighted the previously unknown dangers of radiation poisoning. Eben was sealed inside a lead-lined coffin designed to absorb the radiation that would continue to emanate from his remains for centuries to come. He was interred in the Byers Mausoleum in Pittsburgh Allegheny Cemetery. In 1965, his body was exhumed for testing, and it was found his radiation levels were still dangerously high. Even though nowadays the world is aware of the horrific effects of radium poisoning, it wasn't until the 1980s that radium-based products were banned completely. Dr. Fukashi Masachi, the bodysuit collector. Many people like to collect things, from relatively inexpensive items like stamps to high-value stuff like gold and cars. However, there are very few people who collect human skin pelts. Except, that is, Dr. Fukashi Masachi. Dr. Masachi was born in Japan in 1878 and grew up with an interest in medicine that led him to firstly study at the Tokyo Imperial University of Medicine, before moving to Germany and finishing his studies there. Eventually he founded the Japanese Pathological Society, and his early research focused on syphilis causing arthritis and thyroid disease. However, a life-changing moment happened for Masachi when he realized that tattoo ink killed the skin lesions caused by syphilis. From that moment on, he fell down a pretty macabre rabbit hole that earned him the nickname the bodysuit collector. Through his research, Masachi became obsessed with tattooed skin and was especially fascinated by the bodysuits of the Yakuza. The Yakuza is a Japanese organized crime group that has been in existence for more than 300 years. Their members are often covered in body tattoos, or irozumi, that represent courage, strength and healing. Members of the gangs often have the same tattoos, with the strict requirement that they are not visible in everyday life. Masachi befriended gang members and asked them and other tattooed individuals if he could peel off their skin when they died to preserve it. He even paid people who were willing to donate their skin after their death, and funded others so they could increase their tattoo collection. Surprisingly, over 2,000 people willingly participated in his research. After death, Masachi gently peeled the skin away from the body and scraped off the nerves and tissues. The hide was then either stretched out to dry or preserved by immersion in either glycerin or formalin. At one point, Masachi had 2,000 tattooed human pelts and documented them with over 3,000 photos. However, much of his collection was lost during air raid bombings in 1945, and Masachi lost several others on a trip to America after his suitcase containing skins was stolen. Today, only around 105 pieces remain intact, and some are on display in the Medical Pathology Museum of Tokyo University, although the collection cannot be viewed by the public. Despite collecting bodysuits sounding horrific, Dr. Masachi was well respected among the Yakuza community, and his subjects were willing participants, allowing the doctor and later his son to preserve their art after death. The horrific life of Gail Laverne Grimes. Gail Laverne Grimes was a resident of Stewart in Martin County, Florida. She was only 4 foot 10 inches, but weighed 478 pounds. After leading a relatively normal life, in 1998, Gail broke her leg and rested up on her couch, where she stayed for the next 6 years. On August 11, 2004, her worried brother and his girlfriend called emergency services to inform them that 40-year-old Gail was having emphysema problems and breathing difficulties. When they arrived at her house, which she shared with her partner, 54-year-old Herman Thomas, they were horrified by what they found. Inside the home, the floor and walls were matted with feces, and trash was strewn everywhere. The house was filthy, and the stench was so overpowering, medical staff had to wear protective clothing and install large air-handling hoses to ventilate the horrendous odour. They found Gail fused to the couch she had lived on for years. The crew initially tried to remove her, but the pain was too excruciating, and surgeons spent 6 hours desperately trying to separate her skin from the couch. When this failed, their only option was to try and get Gail to the hospital, still attached to the couch. After several failed attempts, the rescue team finally removed sliding glass patio doors at the back of the home, leaving an opening large enough to get her out. They slid the couch with Gail still attached onto a wooden plank supported by thick boards, which were then slid onto a utility trailer. But because they couldn't get Gail in the ambulance, the trailer carrying Gail and the couch was hooked to the back of a pickup van and transported to the Martin Memorial Hospital. Sadly, doctors were unable to save her life, and Gail died shortly after arriving at the hospital. Her preliminary autopsy listed her death as a result of morbid obesity. Herman Thomas, who lived with Gail, later said he did his best to take care of her, and he tried but failed to get her out of the chair. Gail's body has become one with the couch after years of staying on it, because skin is not a solid substance and is made up of cells and layers. If it's pressed down with enough weight for a long time, fibers from a couch or any other fabric can become entwined in the skin, and because Gail was morbidly obese and stayed in the same position for years, she fused to the couch. A desperately sad story. Anna Maria von Stockhausen. In 18th century Europe, witch hunting was widespread and claimed the lives of thousands of people, primarily women. Many of them were unjustly accused of practicing Satanism, a crime punishable by death. One of these unfortunate victims was Anna Maria von Stockhausen, a German noblewoman arrested in 1775 and sentenced to death. This is her story. Anna Maria von Stockhausen was born in 1737 in Würzburg, Germany. She was part of a wealthy family and had a privileged upbringing. In 1756, she married Frederick Wilhelm von Stockhausen, a military officer, and they had 4 children together. Anna was known for being a devout Catholic who was kind and caring and generously helped the poor and the sick. However, in 1775, her life took a dark turn when a local priest named Johann Baptist Rau accused her of practicing Satanism. He claimed he had seen her performing ceremonies with candles, incense, and animal blood in her castle. He also accused her of being unfaithful to her husband with a French officer, who was allegedly a high-ranking member of the Illuminati, a secret society that was plotting against the monarchy and the Catholic Church. Johann went to the authorities with his claims, and Anna Maria and her husband were arrested. They were taken to Munich, where they were interrogated and tortured. Both denied all the charges, and Anna Maria's husband claimed Johann was motivated by jealousy and resentment. Sadly, the authorities would hear none of it, and they were both found guilty and sentenced to death by beheading. They were due to be executed on April 11, 1775. However, the executioner, who was supposed to carry out the beheading, refused to do so, saying he had received a divine sign that Anna Maria was innocent and could not kill someone who was not guilty. This unexpected turn of events spared Anna Maria's life, but not her freedom or dignity. She was moved to a prison in Kempten, Bavaria, where she stayed until she died of natural causes in 1781. After her demise, Anna Maria's body was wrapped in chains and buried in an unmarked grave. This was a common practice at the time for those accused of witchcraft. It was done to prevent them from rising from the grave and haunting the living. For hundreds of years, Anna Maria lay chained up in her grave until 1972, when her coffin was accidentally discovered by construction workers who were digging near the prison where she died. The discovery of the wrapped-up skeleton sparked public interest about Anna Maria's identity and fate, and her tragic story was uncovered by historians and journalists. They also found evidence that she had been falsely accused, and that Johann had made the whole thing up. Anna Maria became a symbol of the horrors and injustices that befell those who were suspected of witchcraft due to nothing more than superstition and ignorance. Today, her remains are kept in a museum in Kempten, and her plaque reads, "Here lies Anna Maria von Stockhausen, accused of witchcraft and Satanism by priest Johann Baptist Rau, sentenced to death by beheading on April 11, 1775, but spared by the executioner who refused to kill an innocent woman. Imprisoned here until her death on February 6, 1781, buried with chains around her body to prevent her from rising from the dead." The Boy in the Box. In February 1957, a student at La Salle College was spying on girls at the Sisters of Good Shepherd home when he noticed a box in the undergrowth with what he thought was a doll inside. At the time, he thought nothing of it, but when he heard about a missing girl from New Jersey, he returned to the box to take a closer look and realized it was in fact a body. The police were called and revealed it was not the missing girl, but the body of a boy between the ages of 4 and 6 years old. Investigators determined that he was malnourished and had been beaten to death. For the next 65 years, detectives pursued thousands of leads in order to identify the boy, but despite facial reconstruction and hundreds of thousands of flyers being distributed across Pennsylvania, the boy's identity remains unknown. In the Ivy Hill Cemetery in Cedar Brook, Philadelphia, there is a headstone that reads America's Unknown Child. It's a permanent reminder of the child who lies beneath it, a boy who was found beaten to death over 65 years ago. Since then, he's known as the boy in the box. Over the years, many theories have been explored, the most solid being that the boy was sold in 1954 to an abusive woman, and that his name was Jonathan. She physically and sexually abused him, and one night after he vomited up baked beans, she beat him to death in a fit of rage, then tried to bathe him to hide his injuries. The story seemed credible, as baked beans had been found in the boy's stomach, and he had pruny fingers, indicating that he had been left in water. However, ultimately, the police were unable to substantiate the story. It wasn't until 2022, thanks to genetic genealogy and some old-fashioned detective work, that the boy in the box was finally identified as 4-year-old Joseph Augustus Zarelli. His DNA was uploaded to genetic databases, which led detectives to relatives on his mother's side. Investigators found that Joseph Augustus Zarelli was born on January 13, 1953, and that his mother had 3 other children. They also learned the identity of his father. Despite the breakthrough, there still remains unanswered questions about Zarelli's life and death, but the police refuse to speculate on who killed Zarelli, though they noted, "We have our suspicions." At least now there is a name to the grave. Did you know that Einstein's brain and eyes were stolen and were missing for decades? Einstein's autopsy was carried out by pathologist Thomas Stoltz Harvey, who removed Einstein's brain and eyes without the permission of his family and gave his eyes to Einstein's ophthalmologist. Harvey's intention was to preserve and study the brain in the hope that the neuroscience of the future would be able to discover what made him so intelligent. Einstein was later cremated in Trenton, New Jersey, without his missing body parts. When Einstein's son found out, he was initially furious, but later agreed that Harvey could carry out research on his father's brain. Harvey went on to meticulously document and photograph the brain, and slice it into 240 chunks, some that he distributed to various curious researchers. Eventually, Harvey's obsession with Einstein's brain not only cost him his job at Princeton, but also his medical license and his marriage. He later moved to Wichita, Kansas, and kept part of the brain in a cider box beneath a beer cooler. Before his death in 2007, Thomas Harvey donated the remainder of Einstein's brain to the National Museum of Health and Medicine. So the question is, was Einstein's brain any different to anyone else's? There were some differences to the makeup of his brain. His parietal lobes, which are implicated in mathematical, visual, and spatial cognition, were 15% wider than normal, and he had a very rare pattern of grooves and ridges in the parietal regions of both sides of the brain, although whether that was the reason for his genius is still up for debate. However, one thing did stand out. Einstein's brain weighed 1,230 grams, which is smaller than the average brain of a modern human. As to the fate of his eyes, well, to this day, they remain in a safe deposit box in New York City. The gorilla who said animals go to a comfortable hole when they die. Hanabi Ko was a westerly lowland gorilla who was born at San Francisco Zoo on the 4th of July 1971. She was later nicknamed Coco, and as she grew up, Francis Patterson, a budding animal psychologist, started teaching the gorilla sign language. Patterson adopted Coco and established the Gorilla Foundation in Redwood City, California. Coco and Patterson would spend the next 42 years together, and Coco became the longest research study on apes and language in history. It wasn't just Coco's language skills that made her special. The 280-pound gorilla had a soft spot for cats, and for one of her birthdays was given a kitten that she cared for as if it was her own baby. When the cat was killed after being struck by a car, Coco went into deep mourning. Coco lived a privileged life with access to films, books and toys, and she communicated with her human caregivers through sign language, and was a huge attraction to both the public and celebrities. Here she is with Robin Williams.
Coco understands spoken English and uses over 1,000 signs to share her feelings and thoughts about daily events, life, love, even death. It was awesome and unforgettable.
On June 19th, 2018, it was announced that Coco died in her sleep at age 46. Her passing left the world to mourn the loss of a special primate who gave humans an unprecedented window into the thoughts of their species. After her death, her devoted owner, Patterson, reported that they even discussed death, and she asked Coco, "Where do animals go when they die?" Coco signed back, "A comfortable hole." It begs the question, do animals know something that we humans have longed to know for centuries? The 8-Day Bride. On the evening of May 20th, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Christina Kettlewell was found 150 feet from her honeymoon cottage, in just 9 inches of water on the banks of a river in Seven Falls, Ontario. Just days before Christina had eloped with Jack Kettlewell after a 3-year romance. Christina's family had concerns about the marriage, believing that Jack's best friend Ronald Barry was secretly in love with her. He even went on the honeymoon with them, and the cottage they stayed in, that was only accessible by boat, belonged to him. During their stay at the cottage, Jack claimed Christina began to act out of character, often crying and acting irrationally. Shortly after Christina disappeared from the cottage, and curiously on the same day, the cottage caught fire. Ronald arrived to find a disorientated Jack sitting in the cottage with a head injury and rescued him from the blaze. But despite searching for her, there was no sign of Christina. After locals tackled the blaze, Jack took Ronald to hospital and alerted the police. That evening, Christina's body was found in 9 inches of water, just 150 feet away from the cottage. Strangely, there were no signs of violence or burns to her body. An autopsy confirmed that although she had codeine in her stomach, her cause of death was drowning. How Christina's body got there was a mystery, as one of the locals who helped put the fire out said there was no sign of a body in the area at the time, and he had gone down to the river to fetch water for the fire. Jack and Ronald, along with 20 other people, were questioned by police in connection with the death, but no charges were brought. The inquest drew a lot of public attention and crowds of people queued to listen in, but ultimately the jury of the inquest could not agree on whether Christina's death was the result of foul play or not, and their verdict put Jack and Ronald in the clear. However, it later emerged that Christina had previously tried to take her life and had allegedly written a series of suicide notes, raising doubts about Jack's love for her. Surprisingly, Ronald was in possession of the notes that he had managed to rescue from the burning cottage. There were other things that didn't add up. Christina's wedding ring was missing and was never recovered. Also, Jack took out 2 separate life insurance policies on himself and Christina before the marriage. Each $5,000 Canadian policy contained a double indemnity clause, which would allow the beneficiary to collect twice the amount if the cause of death was accidental, a sum worth around $200,000 today. Strangely, Ronald was the beneficiary listed on both policies. Ronald also had taken out a $5,000 Canadian insurance policy on the cottage that burned down and named Jack as his beneficiary. Additionally, the inquest revealed that Jack had given his war gratuity, a payment to Canadian servicemen when discharged, to Ronald, and he had removed all of his family from his will for reasons unknown. Christina's family's initial thoughts that Ronald was in love with her may have been misguided, as it seems Ronald was in love with Jack at a time when homosexuality was illegal. So did the pair get away with murder? it certainly seems likely. For centuries, people believed consuming mummified corpses had medicinal effects. In the modern world, if we have a headache or a bad back, most of us will go to the chemist and buy pain relief. However, years ago, people didn't have that luxury and resorted to often macabre ways of curing their ailments. Driven by the belief that ground up and tinctured human remains could cure anything from bubonic plague to a headache, the bandaged corpses of ancient Egyptians were in high demand from the Middle Ages right up to the 19th century. Napoleon's first expedition into Egypt in 1798 piqued European curiosity and allowed 19th century travellers to Egypt to bring whole mummies back to Europe, bought off the streets. However, not all doctors thought dry old mummies made the best medicine. Some doctors believed that fresh meat and blood had a vitality the long dead lacked, and until 1909, physicians commonly used human skulls to treat neurological conditions. With the constant demand for dead flesh and a limited supply of real Egyptian mummies, you can probably guess that on occasion, bodies were sourced through murder rather than natural causes. By the 19th century, people were no longer consuming mummies to cure illnesses, but Victorians were hosting unwrapping parties, where Egyptian corpses would be unwrapped for entertainment at private parties. It was viewed as a status symbol to be rich enough to own an actual mummy to unwrap. The morbid thrill of seeing dried flesh and bones appearing as bandages came off meant people flocked to these events. By the 20th century, this kind of entertainment stopped, with people realizing the destruction of archaeological remains was destroying history. However, the fascination with mummies remains to this day, and the black market of antiquity smuggling, including mummies, is worth about $3 billion. Sadly, the long dead are still for sale, still exploited, and still a commodity. America's oldest active missing persons case. During Halloween weekend in 1926, 69-year-old Marvin Alvin Clark mysteriously went missing from his home in Oregon, while en route to visit his daughter, Sydney, in Portland, where she lived and worked at Hereford Hotel. Apparently, Sydney was unaware he planned to visit. When his family contacted Sydney 2 days later to ask when Marvin would be returning, they realized he never arrived. He was witnessed taking a bus terminal in downtown Portland. A reward was offered by Sydney to anyone who could give information regarding her dad's disappearance. Witnesses came forward, saying he had been spotted in 2 different hotels. Marvin was quite distinctive, as he suffered from paralysis and could not properly use his right arm, and also walked with a limp, so it's possible these sightings were valid. Almost 2 weeks after he went missing, Marvin's wife Mary received a disconnected postcard written by her husband that was postmarked in Bellingham. That was the last anyone heard of him. Nearly 60 years later, in 1986, loggers discovered a nearly complete human skeleton in the woods between Tigard and Portland. Several days after the discovery, Clark's granddaughter, Dorothy Willoughby, came forward, suspecting that John Doe may have been her missing grandfather. However, no positive identification could be made. Years later, and with the advancement in DNA identification, it was determined that the remains were not Marvin Clark's. As of 2018, the identity of the John Doe's remains are unknown. To date, Marvin Clark's mystery disappearance is the oldest active missing person case in US history. Walter Summerford. Now this is a strange one. During World War I, Walter Summerford was a major in the British Army. He first got struck by lightning in 1918 while riding a horse through a field in Belgium. The strike temporarily paralysed him from the waist down, forcing the army to discharge him. He retired to Vancouver, where he recovered and managed to walk again. However, he was struck a second time in 1924 when he was sitting under a tree fishing. This time he lost feelings in his entire right side. However, once again, Summerford recovered and regained use of his legs. About 6 years later, Mother Nature went for him again when he was struck for a third time while walking in a park. This time the poor man was left completely paralysed from head to toe, and sadly there was no way back, and he spent the rest of his days in a hospital bed before finally passing away in 1932. You think this would be the end of the story. Getting struck 3 times is incredibly rare. However, 4 years later, Walter Summerford was struck by lightning a 4th time when his gravestone was hit after he was laid to rest at the Mountain View Cemetery in Vancouver. Was Walter the unluckiest man in the world, or was some other force responsible? What do you think? Autopsy on a living man. In 2007, 33-year-old Carlos Camejo from Venezuela was involved in a terrible road accident and was declared dead at the scene. His body was taken to the morgue for an autopsy to be performed. The medical officer made an incision on his face, but was stunned when the wound started bleeding and quickly realized a terrible mistake had been made and the man was still alive. As he hastily began to stitch up the wound, Camacho opened his eyes and woke up. Soon afterwards, his wife turned up to identify her husband's body and was stunned to find him still alive and walking towards her in the corridor. Carlos went on to make a full recovery and was later pictured in the press, posing with his autopsy order. Removing your own appendix. From September 1960 until October 1962, Dr. Leonid Rogozov worked in Antarctica. In his role as the only doctor for a team of 13 researchers at a research station. This is fine as long as the only doctor there doesn't get sick. On the morning of the 29th of April 1961, Leonid felt unwell. He was weak, nauseous, and had a fever. He later felt excruciating pain in his lower right abdomen. After trying to self-medicate with painkillers, the doctor soon realized that he was suffering from acute appendicitis. The nearest help was a Soviet research station that was more than 1,000 miles away. However, the severe blizzard conditions meant no aircraft could land, even if they could get there in time. His only option was to perform an operation on himself. On May 1st, with the help of a driver and meteorologist who provided instruments and held a mirror, the doctor attempted to remove the inflamed appendix. A solution of 0.5% Novocaine was used for local anesthesia, and he managed to make a 10 to 12 centimeter incision of the abdominal wall. But while opening the peritoneum, he accidentally cut the cecum and had to suture it. When he finally exposed the appendix, it was found to have a dark stain at its base, meaning it was about to burst. The appendix was removed and antibiotics were applied directly into the cavity. After the operation, the doctor's conditions improved, and 7 days later he removed the stitches and was able to resume his normal duties after about 2 weeks. The surgery was photographed by his colleagues, producing this extraordinary image. The mystery of Harold Edward Holt. In January 1966, Harold Holt became Australia's 17th Prime Minister. When he came to office, he was a breath of fresh air after 17 years of the stuffy, old-fashioned but safe leadership of Sir Robert Menzies. He was younger and more stylish than his predecessor, and today is viewed as the first of the modern Australian Prime Ministers. Despite his somewhat brief time in office, Holt secured a string of noteworthy achievements, including changing Australia's complicated pound and pence system to dollars and cents. He was also responsible for the historic 1967 national referendum that paved the way for Indigenous Australians to be included in the country's population count. However, this term was cut short less than 2 years later, on the 17th of December 1967. Holt, who was an avid spearfisher, was spending the weekend at Portsea when he and 4 companions decided to drive to Point Nepean to watch sailor Alec Rose pass through the Rip on his solo circumnavigation attempt. On their way back, Holt wanted to stop at the remote Cheviot Beach to take a swim before lunch. It was a beach he knew well and had visited on many occasions, but conditions were rough that day, and only one of his companions joined him in the sea. One of the last things Holt said to the group before he went into the water was, "I know this beach like the back of my hand." For unknown reasons, instead of staying close to shore, Holt swam away from his companion and went further and further out to sea, eventually disappearing from view. His disappearance resulted in one of the largest search operations in Australian history, but Holt could not be located, and at 10 p.m. on December 18, 1967, Holt's commission as Prime Minister was terminated, and he was presumed dead. No trace of Holt has ever been found. All that was left was his pile of clothes sitting on the sand at Cheviot Beach. Over the years, many questions have been asked about why a newly elected Prime Minister would take such a risk in rough seas. And there are those who believe he faked his death to escape the increasing pressure of his new role. Wild speculation has also suggested he committed suicide due to problems in his marriage and being worn out from his job. Others claim some sort of foreign power was involved, and that he'd been picked up by a Russian or Chinese mission and been taken against his will. One claim even focused on Holt being a Chinese spy, and a Chinese submarine from Cheviot Beach had whisked him away. All of these theories seem highly unlikely, but so does a 59-year-old serving Prime Minister being allowed to enter the sea in the first place. Lastly, we have the disappearance of Juan Pedro Martinez. On June 25, 1986, 10-year-old Juan Pedro Martinez and his mother, Carmen, climbed into the cab of his father Andreas's truck to accompany him on a delivery to the Basque area of Spain. Andreas was transporting 20,000 litres of sulfuric acid from Cartagena to Bilbao. The drive was expected to take around 8 hours on a route that took them through steep, narrow mountain passes. Everything was going to plan until they reached the Somosierra mountain pass, where Andreas was witnessed driving erratically at high speed around the sharp turns and cliffs in the area. The inevitable happened when Andreas tried to take a curve at speed and the truck tipped over. Both Andreas and Carmen died instantly, and the load of sulfuric acid began to spill out of the tanker, causing a small explosion. Investigators were soon on the scene and initially believed that the brakes had failed, causing the accident. However, this was not the case. It was a while before they realized Juan Pedro was also in the cab, and a frantic search ensued to locate him, but no trace of Juan has ever been found. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, witnesses who saw the accident claimed to have seen a white Nissan stop near the truck and remove something from the wreckage. It was driven by a man with a mustache who was accompanied by a woman. However, neither came forward with information, even after numerous appeals to the public. It also emerged that the tachometer in the truck showed that it made 12 short, unexplained stops during the journey. No explanation has been found for these stops. There were several sightings of a boy matching Juan's description, the first being in Bilbao, then later in Madrid. However, none of the sightings have been substantiated. There are several theories about what happened to Juan. The first being that he perished in the crash along with his parents, but his body was dissolved in the acid that had leaked from the tanker, located directly behind where he was sitting. This has since been debunked as impossible, because although sulfuric acid can dissolve an entire human body, it can take days to do so. A more sinister scenario is that Juan Pedro was kidnapped by drug traffickers and killed for having witnessed more than he should have. Examination of the tank carrying the sulfuric acid allegedly showed trace amounts of cocaine. This, coupled with the sightings of the man and woman removing something from the truck cab, has led to speculation that Andreas was involved in drug trafficking. A third and possibly more plausible theory is that Juan suffered severe head injuries or burns from the leaking acid in the incident, wandering away and subsequently succumbing to his wounds in the surrounding wilderness. If he had sought water for his wounds, he could easily have been swept away by a current. However, the fact is, we may never know what happened to Juan Pedro all those years ago. If he did survive and suffered amnesia, he might not even know himself. And until any trace of his existence is found, the mystery will continue. So everyone, that was a huge collection of real-life horror stories, mysteries, disappearances and strange occurrences that haunted us to the core. We hope you found these stories interesting and not too disturbing. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.